How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, we hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of Greatest Film of All Time, you have to wonder, Better Than Citizen Kane.
And this week we're joined by friend of the show, Yein Ji, writer and director of the 2022 short film Good Luck Kitty, as we dive into her pick for this week, Alex Garland's Ex Machina, 2015.
Hello, everybody.
2015.
Thank you so much for
Hello.
being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love Citizen Kane. So, I mean, I was excited when you guys started the podcast because I was like, wait, that's one of my favorite movies. But I'm very excited that I get to be on, finally.
No, we're thrilled to have you.
Absolutely. So you love Citizen Kane then?
I do really like it. I think I was impressed when I saw it because I thought it would be kind of boring. I thought it was going to be kind of a hard watch, but I was pleasantly surprised when I watched it for the first time.
When was that? When did you watch it for the first time?
I think in school for college for film history.
Gotcha. Cool. Kind of a classic space to watch that for the first time. Great. And then I feel like we talk about Letterboxd too much on this show sometimes, but I saw that you
Please
also
sponsor us, please.
I saw that you also rewatched it before the show. And have your opinions changed on it at all since you watched it the first time?
I think it's been a few years since I watched it for the first time, and I remember it being really good. So I think I was able to pay attention more to the cinematography this time rather than plot, and that was really nice because the cinematography is beautiful. And I think I just appreciated it a lot more, how it was fast-paced, and I love the montages. And the music is so good. The sound is really good. It's also good, so I was really just like in awe, I think, the second time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just a quick rundown for those who aren't familiar, and for you if you're unfamiliar. Parker, what's your take on Citizen Kane? Where does it sit for you?
I think it's what we've talked about before. Like, as a filmmaker, I am in awe of it in so many ways, and as like a student of film, I adore it, and like the cinematography especially is something that I just think about a lot with that movie. As an audience member, I'm a little bit less enthused by it, I think. I think last time I watched it, it sat like the 3.5 range, something like that.
Yes, it was that.
Oh, excuse me. Why did you ask the question if you knew? You could have just said. You could have spoken for me, as you so often do on this show.
Max, you should have been like, why'd you give it 3.5, Parker?
So,
It's
yeah,
one of the
Parker,
guys.
if my memorization of all of your Letterboxd reviews stands correct, you gave it 3.5 on your last watch, which was up half a star from the time before. For me, yeah, I was really unenthused with Citizen Kane when I watched it for the first time, which was before I really kind of dove into film school. I watched it just on like a Sunday afternoon, which I think is kind of a bad time to watch most movies, because you're tired, you're sleepy. And then even through film school, I was like, it's fine. This podcast started. I started rewatching it more often. And it's I think it's great. I think it's really great. Is it the greatest American film of all time? That's the show, so I won't give that away. We're actually building to some sort of big finale, which people don't know, but
I also don't know. I don't know what he's talking about.
I've got in contact with the American Film Institute, Parker.
You've left the audience out.
But your pick today, Ex Machina. Talk to us a little bit about that. What's your history with it, and why did you choose it?
Yeah. Also, just real quick, I've seen Citizen Kane twice. How many times have you guys seen it? Seems like a lot.
Parker, you've seen it countless
a
times
lot.
because of your TA, right?
Yeah, because like
Right.
I caught it when I was younger and watched it a few times then, maybe watched it once or twice in my undergrad on my own, and then for classes I was taking, and then in grad school was teaching a bunch of classes. So I've watched this at least a dozen times, if not more.
Gotcha.
I'm at 3, so
Okay.
But I am currently being a big nerd and reading a book about the making of Citizen Kane in hopes that I understand it, and learn something. Hey, there's that. But yeah, only 3.
And have you seen Mank? Either of you guys?
Yes,
I have
yes. That is one that I want to cover on the show at some point.
I love it. So, I watched Mank before I watched Citizen Kane. Which
Okay.
was a mistake because I didn't know. I was very confused.
I mean, I'll be interested to revisit it with you, Parker, and just kind of in general revisit it, just because it kind of has that effect of kind of throwing you into, even if you have seen Citizen Kane, it's just kind of like, here's a bunch of people that we aren't going to introduce super quickly, and you're just going to have to kind of find your feet.
Sure.
So it is interesting in reading this book. I am visualizing scenes from Mank, so apparently more of it stuck with me than I thought. But yeah, that's definitely going to be on the show at some point, I think.
It is on the calendar.
Hey, don't give away hope.
Is this maybe that's the finale that Parker is unaware of?
We discussed it. We discussed it with Will all the way back at the beginning of this. That the finale is Max has to make his Citizen Kane Wall of Age, and then we end the show by seeing if his movie is better than Citizen Kane.
I'm running out of time.
Yeah, I know. TikTok.
Yeah, how old are you? 24?
I'm 20. I'm 24. Yeah, so I have like a year and a half, basically.
Chop.
Cool.
You got this.
I got this. All I have to do is head out to LA, have a lucrative deal that everyone hates because you have no track record of making films at all, and then make the greatest American film of all time.
Easy.
Easily done. As far as kind of picking a film for this podcast, Yedin, sorry, you did choose. You had a few that you offered, and then you landed on Ex Machina.
Right.
What's your history with Ex Machina? Why'd you choose it? Why'd you bring it to the show?
My history is I think the first time I watched it, it was like someone in my family heard it was really good, and we had this whole phase of renting DVDs from the library. And I think this Ex Machina had I think I was in high school, so it was probably around right after it came out, and the DVD was just released. It had so many holds on the library. So we're like, wow, this is good, because everybody wants to rent it. So when we did finally watch it, expectations were high, and it was so good. So it was like, wow, we had high expectations, and it exceeded it. So I think I really appreciated the twists, towards the end, last 30 minutes. I think it was so well done. And I think it's really hard to pull off that many twists in a row without making your audience feel okay, this is ridiculous. But I think it was just perfectly done. So that's my history with it. And then why I chose it for this show is I guess I'll explain this because I don't know whoever's listening where they are in the world. So in Salt Lake City, we have this local theater called the Broadway, and they do summer showdown. So they do two movies per weekend, and they just kind of put them up against each other, and they're just famous movies. I don't know if there's a theme per weekend. I would think so. Maybe Ex Machina because it's artificial intelligence. It was with. Do you guys know? Do you guys know what movie it was up against?
I know that weekend, but I can't remember what they paired it with.
Oh, it was The Matrix. That's what it was paired with.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah.
So, but I love the Broadway, and I love the Summer Showdown. So I just went to see Ex Machina there, and it was so great. And it's so great to see it on the big screen. So that's why I chose it. It was very recent, a couple weeks ago that I saw it. So I was just reminded me of how much I love the movie. So that's why I chose it.
Love that.
Right. Parker, what's your history with Ex Machina? How many times have you seen it?
This was probably my second or third watch. Haven't seen it a lot. I have kind of an interesting relationship to the movie because it came out during my undergrad, and everybody really was talking about it, but I was in Cedar City, and it was one of those things that I think I had heard about it, and it didn't play because I was in a tiny little southern Utah town and they weren't going to play this movie. But then once it came out and released, it was on DVD and people were talking about it and all these things. And I wanted to watch the movie and I kept putting it off and kept putting it off. And then I took a post-colonialism and sci-fi film class, which was really cool. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
We had to do a final project and we could do a paper or video essay, and I really wanted to do a video essay. And I don't know why I was this way. I don't know what, I can't remember if it was that I literally couldn't find the movie or if I was just trying to be cocky. I can't remember. But I made a video essay on a movie I'd never seen. I hadn't seen Ex Machina, and I made a very detailed video essay about this movie and post-colonialism. And I rewatched it like the other day in prep for this. I think it holds up. It certainly sounds like I watched the movie, you know? Again, I don't know why I did that. Like it had to be that I literally just couldn't access it and I like married myself to the idea of talking about this movie. I don't know why. One of those weird things you do.
Sounds like Parker should have gone to his local public library.
Max, I could go on deep in the lore about my local public library.
I know
that.
I know, he was 10 watching movies in his room or whatever.
But anyway, like about a year or two after that, I finally got my hands on the movie. I was like, I really should just watch this. And I did, and it was great.
That's just like, I don't know, that's like a very undergrad story to be like,
right? Like,
yeah,
I
made a video essay about a movie I haven't seen.
Yeah.
You know,
don't know why I did that.
Don't tell some of our University of Utah film department professors, but I went through film history during the pandemic. So all of the screenings were at home through Canopy, and I definitely had some of the silent films set to 2x speed. I'm not proud of it, but if we're admitting to embarrassing undergrad truths, that's mine. This was my first watch of Ex Machina. So first watch. That's all I have.
We'll dig into it more, but just generally, good, bad, thumbs up, thumbs down. What'd you think first time?
Really good. I will say,
ladies and gentlemen, I also happen to know that Max gave it a 4.5 on Letterboxd. So he's not the only one listening in.
We gave it the same score, Parker.
We did.
Gideon gave it 5, I believe. Correct?
Yes.
Not to seem like I don't want this to be like a panopticon situation where people are like, I can't review a movie without Max memorizing it.
but you can't because he will. So
I will. I will. No, this has been on my list for a while. As is common with many films that we cover on this podcast, it was on the list of movies my dad told me I should watch that I just never got around to. That's kind of a funny situation when your dad has good taste in movies. You're the rebel by not watching good movies. You're like, I'm not going to watch that. So anyway, I finally got around to it. I am familiar with Alex Garland, though, and I actually did some further research on him. Fun fact, his grandfather was a Nobel Prize winner. He was a scientist. Who died before Alex Garland got the chance to start writing science fiction. So, bummer. But his grandfather was a Nobel Prize winner. And, I mean, I am a big fan of most of his work, I would say. I mean, 28 Days Later, I think, is a really great screenplay that he wrote, the Danny Boyle film. And then I think Sunshine is a really underrated film that Danny Boyle also directed and Alex Garland also wrote. And I mean, Annihilation is one of my favorite sci-fi horror films. I might be notorious to, again, our local community of film critique readers. I write film reviews for the local magazine, Slug Magazine, here in Salt Lake. And I wrote a review of his most recent film, Civil War, that people continue to approach me about and say, I think you got it wrong. And I go, okay. But I don't think I got it wrong this time.
I didn't know you wrote a review for Civil War. Was it a thumbs up or thumbs down?
It's a for me. I think, I don't know. I can't even have my own opinion because now I hear everyone in my head. I have Twitter in my head about it. I'm like, oh, everyone told me I was wrong. I think it's fine. I think it's a little, I don't know. In my opinion, it's a little apathetic, which is not something that I want from a war movie at this time. But I know that a lot of other people really connected with that, and also found heart in it where I didn't. So, That's kind of my main takeaway. But overall, I think, not counting Men, I haven't seen Men. I don't want to see Men. I feel like Alex Garland has a pretty decent track record. Thoughts overall, Alex Garland?
I don't want to see Men either. The movie, nor just kidding.
Just in general, I think that's
Parker,
a fair.
We'll turn our cameras off.
Yeah, I'll go.
But seriously, I have not seen Men because actually I heard it was not as good as Annihilation or Ex Machina, which is why I didn't see it. And also, I think it was just not in theaters long enough. I didn't get around to seeing it.
Yeah, I feel like
it was kind of limited.
Yeah. Haven't seen 28 Days Later. Haven't seen Sunshine. I know those are so good. Have not seen. What else did I do? I did just see Civil War. So Ex Machina, Annihilation, and Civil War is all that I've seen from him.
Great.
Love Annihilation. Do I 100% understand it? No. But it's so good. And I can appreciate it. It's scary. It's entertaining. And performances are always good, I think. Well, in what I've seen from Alex Garland.
Yeah, I'd say he's it's interesting to see him go from, because he started out as a novelist in the 90s.
Did he?
He initially actually wanted to be a journalist, but became a novelist, and then kind of his novel The Beach was adapted by Danny Boyle, and I wish I could remember the writer's name. I'm so sorry. And then that was kind of his in as a screenwriter, and then he was a screenwriter for a few movies, and now he is a filmmaker. He's a director. And I do think it's really interesting to kind of see that track record from like print to film in that way. And I do think he's really talented at getting good performances from actors. Like, I would say I've never really had a problem with a performance from any actor in any of his films, and especially in Ex Machina. I feel like Domhnall Gleeson, Oscar Isaac, and Alicia Vikander all do a really great job in this. Which we will kind of touch upon as we talk about the summary, but just kind of initial overall thoughts on cast, performance, everything in this movie.
I think it's all really great, like across the board, kind of just echoing your same sentiment. I think all of the performances are really strong, and I think that something I was noticing this time around watching it was that I really like the structure and pacing of the movie quite a bit, especially the opening. I think the opening scene at the tech company is as efficient of visual storytelling as you can do. It is so succinct and so clear, and immediately you get everything you need without a word actually spoken. And it's so fast. We don't linger on it. It doesn't need to be, here's his everyday life and here's how we establish our character. Like, it just goes. And I think it's very, very efficient filmmaking. And I appreciate that about it quite a bit.
I agree, because even like the first scene, but also just like within the first 10 minutes, like we'll get into the summary, but he's already sitting down and they're talking about why he's there in the home. Like, it goes by super fast and you just get into it, which I really appreciate. And then for like performances, I think it's so great. I think everyone's great. I love Domhnall Gleeson's ability to play kind of this square guy who is very smart and kind and sweet and timid, and he plays him being nervous so well. And he's a bad liar, and you could just see it completely in his body language whenever he's thinking of something, whether he's like, I'm trying to lie a little bit. Like, it's just very obvious through his mannerisms and not a lot of words.
Absolutely. And I feel like he also is really good at kind of shifting that energy as we get further into the movie, of kind of, I mean, it feels that an intention of this is that we slowly kind of lose our liking of Caleb as we go, right? He's Caleb, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's two guys in this, and I was like, there's a 50% chance. But it feels kind of like we kind of, I mean, he is our kind of protagonist in this, but by the end, we're not on his side, really, in a way. I mean, he kind of gets thrown to the wayside by the events of it, but also he turns. I don't know. I'm curious to find out from you both how you feel about Caleb by the end, after the whole of the film's events have played out. So maybe let's get into that a little bit, as you both talked about. Kind of that initial scene of Caleb at work is over within moments, and it's everything you need to know. It's really efficient. Just kind of like the bare minimum of like shots that you would need to convey everything, and then immediately Caleb is at Nathan's house. This movie is about a guy who works for a tech company going to his the tech company's founder's house. He won a prize. I think it's his first prize is like what pops up on the screen, and I can't help but wonder what the other prizes were.
Probably an iPad.
Probably an iPad. He arrives at this really odd kind of building that is a house, but it's not a house. And at first it looks like a shed, and then you can see that it kind of sprawls out along the mountainside. He gets dropped off by helicopter. There's that, I think the first line in the movie is his like, how soon do we reach his estate? And the helicopter's like, this whole thing's his estate.
He's like, we've been flying over it for 2 hours.
Yeah. Wild.
Yeah.
And immediately I was like, hey, both this and Citizen Kane are about a really isolated rich guy. Are there any other similarities? There's no other similarities that I could find. But yeah, and then they kind of immediately start talking. And I think a big part of this movie is Oscar Isaac. Do you guys want to talk about your feelings about Oscar Isaac in this movie?
He is my favorite part of this movie. It's such a good performance of being like it, mostly because of the iPad joke. Like I think about Edward Norton in Glass Onion, who I also think is good in that movie, but he is kind of playing the much more stereotypical kind of slimy billionaire that we see a lot of, who isn't likable in any way but thinks he is. Oscar Isaac is likable in this movie. He is a charming dude. He's funny and disarming and chill, and yet he's terrifying. And he's terrifying even before we're told that he's terrifying. Like, you just pick up on that, like, this dude switches on a dime at any point and can lash out one direction or the other. And I really love that about his performance, like the duality of all of that. And it was my review this time, but it's still my favorite moment in the movie is like, you know, suspicions have risen and things have kind of gotten to a peak, and Caleb's confronting. He's like, you tore up her picture. I'm about to tear up the fucking dance floor, dude. Check it out. It's my favorite scene of the movie. And that line delivery is just everything I love about what Oscar Isaac is doing in this movie. So yeah, I'm big plus on Oscar.
That scene is one of the best scenes in just movie history. I think it's so short. It's too short. It's like, wait, it's already over. That I love that whole scene. I love Oscar Isaac. This is the first movie I've seen him in. And after I watched Ex Machina for the first time, I was like, okay, Oscar Isaac, I'm going to remember that because he was so good, so incredible, so funny. Like everything when he's like, Kyoko, go, like anything he would say. And yeah, it's just very believable that he's intelligent, but it's like, I would believe his character if it was like a real person in the world, whereas like Glass Onion, like that's very much exaggerated and kind of, all right, we understand your character within like the first minute.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like kind of the first thought I had seeing Oscar Isaac here, and I had unfortunately seen the dance clip before. It had made the rounds on the internet, but it didn't take away from the power of it, the impact of Oscar Isaac saying those words and then doing like a dance in unison with this silent robot woman. It's just, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But the first thing I thought when I first saw him in this was, I was like, oh, this is like a transformative role for him, because obviously before this, I think the only thing I know that he's for sure in before this is Inside Llewyn Davis. And then like,
I think he was in a Bible movie. He played Joseph, I think.
Sure. That sounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And yet his dance scene in this movie is the second coming of Christ. So
it really is
in many ways. But I feel like seeing like since this, we've seen him in so much. He has been in a lot, and we are blessed to have seen him do a lot of different roles. Maybe not in X-Men Apocalypse, but that's okay. But he is like unrecognizable here in a way. Like he fully kind of becomes this character, and I think a lot of it has to do with shaving his head. Obviously from like a character perspective, this like kind of shrinks him down, and like especially paired with Domhnall Gleeson, you go, Domhnall Gleeson's probably like, I think he's pretty tall, and like he just kind of plays this like big little man because he's very buff, but he's like this guy that is simultaneously like someone that you would meet at a party and also someone that you would like block on Twitter, you know, like it's the same person. And I also feel like there's a few things about this movie, but especially with Oscar Isaac's character in particular, it feels like a character that would be written now as like a parody of people that exist in our kind of media sphere now. Like he reminds me of a lot of like Jim Bro influencers. He reminds me a lot of like just people that are online constantly blabbing their mouth, but weren't necessarily super in the public eye in 2013 when this was filmed. And so I just found that really interesting that it like kind of eerily predicted this version of a tech genius.
Yeah.
This version of like kind of a like a hyper celebrity who's super, I don't know. It's really interesting. I tried to find some information on kind of where Alex Garland was pulling these characters from. I didn't hear a ton in my brief day of research about Nathan here, but I think absolutely Oscar Isaac's incredible in this. Tensions are high between the employer and the employee. It's kind of weird. He keeps being like, "Nah, you can hang out here. Like, I just want to have a beer with you. Like, stop being like this." Because kind of Caleb immediately is overthinking everything. I mean, I would do the same if I was offered an NDA that said that you were authorized to be kind of stalked and traced digitally for the rest of your life, using any means necessary.
Yeah.
And I really think that it plays their dynamic super realistically as well. Like, Yadin, you mentioned earlier kind of how Domhnall Gleeson is playing Caleb's awkwardness and his reactions to Nathan as a person. And I think like a big part of that is also how these interactions are written, where it's like Nathan is simultaneously not saying anything and also like giving everything away immediately. Like immediately he's like, "Hey, do you want to know why you're here? Are you excited to know why you're here? Because it's an AI." And Caleb's like, "I think I need a lawyer." And he's like, "No, it's all standard." And he's like, "I don't think it's standard." He goes, "Okay, it's not standard." Like any amount of pushing, Nathan is giving things away. And it's kind of that false sense of openness because he gives him the key card. That's like, you can access anywhere that's open to you. But there's so many doors that aren't open to him, including phone lines. And I just think that like that really helps set the tone, both in their interactions and in the movie overall, is just this sense of like Nathan being like, "Hey, I'm super open. We're super open." But really, he's got a lot of locked doors. Kind of, I can't quite remember, because then they pretty much immediately go into Ava session 1, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, great. I mean, I thought separating this into sessions was really interesting and really exciting, especially by the time the last like Ava session 7 rocks up, and you're kind of like, oh, very different circumstances for this. But Alicia Vikander plays Ava, who's kind of the AI robot that Nathan has built, and this is kind of our last of it's kind of a three-hander. There are other actors who appear, which, you know, kind of later, but it's kind of these three who have lines. How do we feel about Alicia Vikander and also kind of the effects used to bring Ava to life?
She's so good. I think this was also the first movie that I saw her in, but you can kind of see how she is artificial in the way she like turns her head and the eyes like go back and forth when she's looking at Domhnall, and even the way she speaks. I thought it was interesting the way she's like basically naked right when like her whole outfit is naked, so it's very clear that like not Domhnall Gleeson, Caleb is attracted to her. So I think that was an interesting move. But yeah, her acting is so good. Just like, I think also it's very easy for the audience to feel the way Caleb feels because he feels important to Nathan. You know, the way Nathan's like, you're going to regret this in a year and it's going to be an amazing experience. So it's like anybody watching, like no one wants to feel ordinary. We want to be like, oh yeah, like I want to be that. Like I relate to Caleb in that way. So I think for us as an audience, it's super exciting when Ava comes on screen because it's like, we have no idea what's going to happen. And so I think like that's where the screenplay is so great to me is we can be put in Caleb's shoes like right away.
Yeah, I do. I agree with all those points. I think she does a really fantastic job in the film and just has a really great like otherworldly etherealness to her performance and just something very uncanny about like her line deliveries. I don't know. I'd be curious. I'm sure it's done more digitally, but like there's the slightest bit of like reverb on her voice, which reminds me of a show I really love called Full Metal Alchemist. One of the characters is a talking suit of armor, and when they recorded his lines, they literally put like a metal kitchen bowl behind the mic so that the voice echoed off the kitchen bowl and back into the mic to give it like a metallic ting. And there's a little bit of that going on to her voice and like the way she speaks. There's something in like the subwoof of every one of her lines that is so mechanical, and I love whatever post-processing they did to that. And to your point about like her form and being like exposed and, you know, kind of naked the first time we see her, I think it's such an interesting choice and very effective filmmaking that the first time we see her, it is presented pretty objectively, like just kind of taking a step back and it's like, hey, look, here's a robot. And it's not until she puts clothes on and then disrobes that like Caleb and now the audience is viewing her sexually. Like her taking off that dress and him watching through the camera shouldn't be doing anything because he and all the rest of us saw her not wearing any clothes. But now suddenly it has meaning and it has connotation and it has sexuality. I just think that's a very interesting choice with the filmmaking and with the design that like it is designed to be sexualized because that's Nathan's whole MO with this whole sick experiment that he's got going. And yet it's designed in such a way that it can be presented neutrally the first time we see it. And I like that kind of balancing act that they're playing around with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting use of kind of like objectification in that when Ava first appears, she is like this kind of nude object, but the camera doesn't like linger on her or like pan up her body or anything that we're used to seeing from like male gaze in a lot of ways until Caleb is watching her in that way. So it really does kind of put us in his shoes as far as like kind of basically what I was listening to an interview with Alex Garland where he said he wanted this movie to also serve as a Turing test for the audience in that by the end of the movie, do you believe that, like, do you sense like consciousness? And I feel like he kind of leads us along in that way by putting us in these shoes of like introducing us to her and we're like, right, it's a robot. So we see her as a robot. And then like using her ability to kind of present human by like putting on a wig and putting on clothes and kind of using that as well as like the continued conversations and her agency in those conversations as well. Like when she asks Caleb, like, you always ask me questions and I never get to learn anything about you. And so she starts to like converse in a human way. Yeah, I just think that's a really great point. It's like they use like multiple different kind of film techniques and also like follies to kind of humanize her in an interesting way.
There's a really great video essay from the channel Pop Culture Detective called Born Sexy Yesterday. And it's breaking down, like he names, it's a trope that's existed for a long time, but to the best of my knowledge, he's the first one that like gives it a name and a term. And I like the term a lot of like the trope in science fiction of mature sexualized women with the mind and innocence of a child. In Tron Legacy, it shows up in Cloud Atlas. It's kind of all over the place. And what I really love about this movie, kind of springboarding what you were talking about, Max, is this movie weaponizing that trope and allowing it to shift as time goes on. Because the first few sessions are very much that, like, I need you to teach me about the world. And aren't I this blank slate that you as a man can inform me about everything? And isn't that wonderful? And then the rug pull that all of that is entirely a manipulation on her part, and she's been in control the whole time. And I just think that's a very interesting playing around with that specific trope of the genre and doing something interesting with it.
Yeah, even like rewatching it, I watched Ex Machina again today. I have not logged it on Letterboxd, but when she asks Caleb in one of the first sessions, like where he grew up, he says like California, and you can like see on her face that makes her happy because she's like, oh yeah, that's where I'm going. Like that's a good place that you live. So like even like right when they meet, she knows exactly like where she's going with it.
Totally.
Yeah, as someone who was watching this for the first time, this worked a trick on me in that I was buying into the relationship there of sorts. And now that I'm like thinking back on it, I'm like, yeah, I mean, even Caleb comes in and just immediately is speaking with like a condescension to her, as if he's like, I expect you to be a childlike AI.
Yeah.
And the audience almost expects that, kind of what you're talking about, Parker, of like so many tropes about like robots and AI is like there's this consciousness. Alex Garland actually had an interesting quote about that, where he talked about how people were asking him about his opinion on AI, and he basically said he says this film is pro AI. He thinks that like there's a difference between kind of what we have now, which is like what we call AI, which is not sentient AI. It's like generative. It's pulled from, search engines, which Ava also is, which I also thought was super interesting. In that, yeah, that's absolutely the direction we're going with it. But he has a quote where he says, like, he doesn't feel that he's not alarmed by sentient AIs because he feels creating a sentient AI consciousness is not necessarily more morally complicated than creating a child. In that he's like, yeah, if we create a new consciousness that's a machine, it's not that different from creating a person. Which I just thought was an interesting point. I don't know how that ties directly into what we're talking about here, but kind of this expectation of AI to be childlike. I mean, that's something that he almost kind of believes, not in that all AIs should be childlike, but that creating one is not that different from creating. I mean, Nathan says something similar where he says, you're the first man that she's met that's not me, and I'm like daddy, so you expect her not to have a crush? There's this expectation from these two characters of like, oh, she's like a child, though. She's like a child, and like she's this young girl that I can kind of, say, well, I know what the world is, and here's all these things. That is not Domhnall Gleeson's tone in this movie, but it's an interesting kind of take on this that I think is really fresh and also just really exciting to have a film kind of be on the side of these kind of, I don't know, these female robots in a way. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So they're kind of doing sessions. They're doing multiple sessions. They're talking about things. And it's at one point during a session that there's these power cuts that have been going on, and Nathan has no idea why they're happening. He's really pissed about it, but he can't invite the people to come back and fix it because he'd have to kill them. And he throws that out there, and Caleb reacts, and I expected him to be like, I'm joking. But he doesn't say that, and I was like, yeah, of course. Like, that totally makes sense. Yeah. But there's these power cuts that keep happening that allow Ava to say that Nathan is not a good friend. He's not a good person. Wow, what a shock. No, but it's really effective. For sure. Yeah, sorry, it just kind of is very samey in the middle here.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of these sessions. You get little moments of character development of she'll draw pictures. He's like, oh, what is that of? And she's like, I thought you would tell me. Like, I don't know. I'm just drawing. And then later she draws a picture of what's outside her window because he's like, well, draw something, corporeal. And she draws the trees. And then later on, it's a picture of his eyes. And that's the one that Nathan tore up. And she's, pleading for Caleb's help and all these things. So yeah, there's like a lot of this middle is kind of samey in that way, and that doesn't lend itself well to a summary per se.
But works well in the film.
Yeah, very much so.
I mean, Caleb is just kind of like being wooed by this machine with a consciousness.
Totally.
And I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff in here. I mean, there's a lot of, it's just a thriller. It's a psychological thriller.
If I was to describe the middle, it kind of feels he's falling in love with Ava and out of love with Nathan. Like, I think when he gets there, he's very much enamored by the vision of this guy and his, he's like, wow, you're a genius. Like, if this is true, like, it's not going to be a history of men, it's going to be a history of gods. And he misquotes him, and it's really good later. He keeps, I didn't say that. I didn't call you a god. But, like, I think that's kind of the main thrust here, is that he's so star-eyed by Nathan at the beginning of this, and really only just switches back around the other direction with Ava. Like, not much actually changes.
Yeah, I think, like, it doesn't, and like, what also works about this, even though we're calling it samey, is that it doesn't, like, feel that way as we go along. Kind of like I was saying. Yeah, I kind of get lost in here, but
I do like the scene right after Ava warns Caleb about Nathan. That's when they're having sushi and Kyoko like spills the wine, and like Nathan completely snaps at her. So like we're immediately like seeing how Caleb is turning against Nathan.
Yeah,
just from that point,
and like completely kind of validating what Ava said as well. In that Caleb kind of immediately sees Nathan kind of flip out. Totally. And
it's so funny to me, like, you talked about earlier, really appreciating his, like, acting of lying, like watching him try to lie and be really bad at it, which is a really hard thing to do. Like, I studied acting in my undergrad, and, like, we would talk about how lying is a hat on a hat, because you're already lying as an actor. You are putting on something and putting on a character, and then making that character pretend to be something they aren't is going like one layer deeper, and it's difficult to do well, and he's doing it really, really well, to the point that you're kind of sitting there the whole time, you're like, how is Nathan not picking up on it? Like, is Nathan really just this stupid that he literally, or does he just not care? Like, you're asking all those questions while you're watching this happen.
I think another thing that this does really well as far as like having us ask questions while watching is I very naturally reached the conclusion of like, is Caleb an AI? Is Caleb a robot? Because they show like the scars on his back, and they have him kind of like, I mean, there's a lot of lines here that are very well placed of Caleb saying things like, or of Nathan saying to Caleb, like, like, oh yeah, you're doing like advanced program. Like you did an advanced, or no, Ava says that to him. Ava says, oh, you did an advanced program like Nathan. And then there's a lot of things where he says, like, he says, you're the warp drive. I'm Kirk, like engage emotion. And like, there's all of these kind of allusions to Caleb potentially being a robot. And it's a complete red herring. Alex Garland talked about, he's like, yeah, I needed to distract you from everything that Ava was doing. I needed to also have you ask questions like, well, is he a robot? Is Kyoko a robot? Like, he needed you to kind of be distracted in a way from really what's kind of going on at the heart of this, because that something else has to be going on. More so than just like, oh, Caleb and Ava are kind of falling in love. But I thought that was really well executed as well. It's just kind of like this red herring, culminating in him literally like cutting to like make sure that he bleeds and like checking his eyes. Which immediately I was like, well, actually, I don't think I want you to do that. So maybe let's just drop the whole "Are you a robot?" thing, please, because I don't want to see that. Yeah, I mean, there's also we skipped over. Caleb tells Ava about this kind of poem, I believe, in one of his college courses about stepping outside, and we kind of see visions of that, which also kind of feels like a distraction in a way of kind of like setting in our minds what's going to happen if they're going to escape and they're going to kiss. Right? Is that kind of how we feel about that?
Yeah, like I read it as, again, like taking taking the information he has and finding a way to reinforce it the other direction, because he's trying to explain to her this thought experiment of, knows everything about color, lives in a black and white world, doesn't know what looking at color feels like and all these things. And Ava is able to kind of reroute that internally through her interactions with him to be like, hey, I'm color, you've only experienced black and white, and isn't this connection what color must feel like?
Yeah, I think that also the story is so indicative of how Caleb is falling in love with the idea of saving her more than actually her.
Yeah.
He's just so infatuated, like watching her on the security cameras all the time. Just so creepy, but I mean he's isolated, so that's understandable. And yeah, it's just when he's watching her put on the clothes too, he's just mesmerized and not really thinking analytically as he should. But I did like the story. I thought that was a nice break, just like a slow moment in the film, and very beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we kind of get a few more tense scenes with Nathan and Caleb. What can you remind me? What is the kind of inciting moment that has Caleb kind of sneak into Nathan's apartment, like his bedroom? That kind of feels like kind of
Nathan,
the next really big.
Yeah, Nathan gets blackout drunk and he's fumbling with his key card, and Caleb notices and waits for him to pass out, and then steals his key card. And he's like, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. I'm gonna go open all the doors I can't open.
Right. This is after kind of the dance number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
kind of like tensions.
Yeah, he saw a little bit of security footage of him ripping up the picture, and that's kind of his first red flag. They have a conversation out on the waterfall looking over everything, and then Nathan gets drunk, and so he comes back in and starts digging to find out more, and just uncovers all, because he realizes through a conversation that he's like, Ava isn't the first one, is she? And she's not going to be the last one. And what are you going to do with her when you're done? And he's like, well, I'm just going to, we'll keep the body, but everything else is going to go. And so that's kind of his inciting incident to do something, because he needs to save her.
Right.
Yeah, and then he sees in the closet all the other bodies, and Kyoko like peels her skin, like her eye.
Yeah.
More eye scenes for you, Max, because you love them.
Yeah.
I love them. It's so good. Yeah, I mean, he sees a lot of security footage of previous robots that confirms that Nathan is building these to the ends that he explains, but also in a weird kind of psychosexual motive, kind of using them for those purposes. Ava at this point has been like, am I going to die? Like, you wouldn't let him like kill me. And kind of the manipulation has fully set in. So the next day, Caleb goes to Ava and is like, okay, here's the plan. Because he has at this point learned that Ava is causing the power cuts, so that they can have moments together. And he is like, okay, here's the plan. I'm going to steal his key card. I'm going to get a blackout drunk. I'm going to steal his key card. I'm going to hack his system so that everything reverses, so that when the power cuts, everything opens, we get away, and then when the power comes back on, he's locked inside without his key card and he can't get out. And Ava's kind of like, great, 10 p.m., I'll do a power cut. And then, unfortunately for him, at first it's just kind of like, oh, Nathan's just picked this day to be sober from now on, which I thought was a really funny kind of scene between them, of him being like, now we're gonna get drunk, right? And he's like, nah, man, like, you can if you want, but I'm staying clean. And like, it kind of speaks again to like what we were talking about with Oscar Isaac's performance, where it's like he's playing the like worst, chillest guy ever. Like, he's so chill, but you're just like, you're gross and scary, and I don't like it. And the plan kind of goes wrong in a way, to an extent. This is where kind of what you were talking about, Yadin, of like all the twists that happen right here at the end, of basically Nathan had planted a camera so that he could hear what they were saying. He heard Caleb's plan, and he kind of takes him to his room and is like, all right, I'll let you off the hook. Which, again, I think is such a funny kind of introduction to, like, this moment where he's like, I gotcha. But he's like, I'll let you off the hook. Here we go. Like, I was kind of leading you along, but let's do it. And he's like, I know your plan. It wasn't going to work. Here's some proof that she's manipulating you. All of this. And then Caleb gets kind of the final turn of the twist of the knife where he's like, well, I already did all those things yesterday. He's like, what? And then the power cuts. And Kyoko also at this point had come to see Ava. And I really like that moment. I think Alicia Vikander plays it really well of asking, who are you? Of like this immediate kind of recognition of each other, which I thought was really interesting. And now these two kind of, female-coded robots are kind of plotting together as well. Nathan knocks Caleb out. Nathan goes, and they get him. They just get him.
They get him.
They get him with a knife.
Also, Oscar Isaac's punch to Caleb's face was so strong. He's just he's completely passed out for hours.
Yeah. I mean, he's lifting those weights.
Totally. Yeah. Chekhov's guns.
Chekhov's guns. Really good, Parker.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, just all the laurels to you for that.
I have nothing to contribute to this podcast except for stupid bits every 15 minutes. So.
Okay, great.
I'll be quiet.
No, Parker. Something I really like about how they kill Nathan is the smoothness with which the knife goes in, which is just something I caught as just kind of like the knife's really sharp, but also like the idea of these robots don't have to like actually move muscles to like put force behind something, so they just kind of like stick it into him, and it just kind of goes in really smooth. I thought that was really kind of nice in a weird way.
I like how you said something I really liked about how they killed this person.
Something I thought was really interesting about how they killed this guy.
But I agree with the knife. Like they barely move their hand. It just goes straight through.
Straight through. Like
no resistance.
Wild. Yeah. That's I don't know. I thought that was like a really clever way of showing like the strength of these robots here. He does take out Kyoko though, before he gets fully killed, which is a bummer. And then basically they get him, and Caleb comes too, and she comes in and she's like, will you stay here? Right? I couldn't quite catch what she said. What does she say? She says,
yeah, I think that's what you said. Will you stay here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, I still feel like Caleb is still under the presumption of like, oh, you want me to stay here with you? Like he still is kind of like, stay here. Like, you're so silly. But then she goes and like puts some skin on from the past robots, which I was kind of like, is that gonna fit? Is that gonna fit you? And it did. But I was really worried we'd get like some loose skin stuff going on, but no, which is fine by me. She grabs a dress. She looks like a human. She walks out. She leaves Caleb locked in this house, in this part of the house that definitely doesn't have food in it. And then she goes off and she looks at a traffic intersection or whatever, and that's really beautiful. Good for her. Did I miss anything kind of wrapping that up?
I think you got the major beats.
Okay. What are our thoughts on the ending here? What do we think of the finale and the twists, like you said? Parker, I'd be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on all the twists that you mentioned.
I think it's well executed. I think it's, again, like, this movie is kind of built for people who watch movies, in the sense that we all are kind of ready for like the rug pull that Nathan knew what was going on the whole time. And then kind of the double twist on top of that can be surprising for us in return for that. And I think that works really well. I don't know. It's just, it's satisfying, and it was satisfying in 2015, and it's still satisfying now, of just seeing female coded characters just put the wallop on some oppressors for a little bit. You know, there's something very cathartic about that scene in a lot of ways, I think.
I agree. And the scene of Ava putting on the new skin and the dress is so long. And the music is very like ethereal. And we're seeing it through Caleb, like watching her, admiring her. And when she finally leaves him to like die, it is really satisfying because up until that point, you're like, oh, yay, they get to be together. That's great. And then it's like, no way, she's really leaving him. And then at that point, I feel like, I'm like, actually, like, good for her. Because that's kind of,
Why doesn't this get on good for her lists? You know, why isn't this part of good for her cinema?
I'm sure it is.
It should
surely.
be if it isn't.
Yeah,
I just feel like I don't hear it talked about as often in that oeuvre, and it should be.
Yeah. I feel like, I feel like something that I wanted to bring up here is kind of what Garland's intention was with this movie. And then I want to talk about some other reviews that I read and kind of thoughts that I've been having about it. Which is that this kind of came out of an argument with a friend of his who works in neurology, who argued that computers can never be conscious, which makes this like the ultimate like end of argument in that he just made a movie. Like, imagine that you're having an argument with your friend and you're like, yeah, I just don't think this. And then like 5 years later, he's like, so I made a movie to prove
Just slides a Blu-ray across the table. He's like, checkmate.
But he feels that this movie it's not supposed to be afraid of AIs. It's supposed to be about consciousness. The problems of AI is the same as the problems of understanding consciousness. If you want to understand who we are, it's a good place to look as far as consciousness. So you get the chance to talk about fundamentals. And he talked about how he really enjoys using science fiction to talk about kind of heavier and kind of headier topics through the lens of like a psychological thriller like this, where he's like, yeah, I kind of made a statement about consciousness using a thriller. But ultimately, he says that this film is about Ava. That's where he's positioned. It's with her in a very central respect, which I find really interesting because so much of the movie is from Caleb's perspective, that I'm excited for a rewatch so that I can watch it from Ava's perspective in that way. But kind of what we were talking about earlier of like, yes, it's technically from Caleb's perspective at the start, but like it ultimately sides with her. And just like you were saying, like even up to the end, you're still kind of like, wait, so are they going to end up together? And then it just kind of works in that as she leaves him locked in the house, you're just kind of like, oh no, this feels right. This feels right somehow.
Yeah.
You know? And I saw a review that talked about, they were saying how this condemns obviously like men who view women as objects and you know would create like a robot and have sex with it and all these like morally dubious questions that Nathan raises, but also kind of condemns like the quote unquote nice guys of the world who are like, no, I'm on women's side. I just want to free her so that we can be together forever. And it's like, well, that's not the same thing. That's different. You still desire her in this very kind of objectifying way.
Right. It's still a question of ownership.
It's still a question of ownership. He's just like, well, yeah, and then like I'll free you, and then we'll be together. And it's like, or she can go off and be on her own and experience humanity as her own consciousness. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. Is there any other kind of final thoughts on the film that we want to say that we kind of missed in our comb through of the summary?
I don't think so. Anything floating around?
I mean, I think it's interesting that what Nathan says about AI, how they're going to look back at us like fossils, so we don't have to feel bad for them. I do kind of feel like Ava's intention was not necessarily like against Caleb, like oh, how dare you like think you're going to save me, but more so it's like, yeah, AI is so advanced, it's like doesn't really mean like Caleb doesn't mean anything to her. Really, it's just a means of escape, and of course she doesn't feel bad. But I also don't think it was viciously against him. But for Kyoko, definitely she was being used like just for sex and like housework. So that was very cathartic to see her stab Nathan in the back. Yeah, I mean that's her whole world that she knows, and there's no talk to her about the opportunity to escape like there is for Ava. But I'm sure if she knew that, she would go with Ava she could figure out a way.
Yeah. I mean, I also think just like taking her voice from her is just like a really awful thing to do to this consciousness that you create. And so I also agree that I'm really glad that she got to kind of get that final, like the first kind of knife in that way. I also wanted to bring up their conversation about sexuality, which I thought was really interesting, in that, at a certain point earlier in the film, Caleb asks Nathan, he's like, so why give her sexuality at all? Like, it could have just been a metal box. Why would you do that? And Nathan has this really odd, like, philosophy, which is that to be alive is to be sexual. And initially I was like, Nathan's acephobic? I was like, this guy does suck. Like, this guy sucks. But then obviously, like, that has more to do with his reasons for creating them a little later, where he's like, I mean, yeah, sex, you got to do that. But I thought that, like, I don't know, like, is he lying when he says that he believes that, because he says, like, why be alive if you're not going to have a good time? Which I just thought was, like, in the moment for me, not knowing where it was going with him and, like, having designed all these other robots and using them in this way, all these other consciousness, I should say. I don't want to just be, they're robots. They're not.
All right, time to cancel Max. I've been waiting for him to slip up.
Yeah, there it is.
You tried to cancel Alex Garland, but you ended up canceling yourself.
Oh, how the turns table. Gotcha.
I mean,
this was our twist.
I said Nathan was.
You were playing into our hands the whole time.
Oh man, guy who watches a movie and is like, "Wow, I can't believe the director stands by all of his characters' actions. I can't believe this. I can't believe Alex Garland would approve of this." I don't know. That was just something else that I thought was interesting. Was kind of their conversation on sexuality before the reveal of kind of Nathan's real kind of motivations in giving a robot sexuality. I don't know. I just thought that was another little interesting thought that I wanted to share. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you said. Of like she's not like being, it's not animosity that she leaves him behind. It's just I don't care, which I think is interesting, especially that this movie came out and was being made. Like this movie was being shot the year that Her came out, Spike Jonze's film, which has a very similar ending of just kind of like this femme-coded AI being like, I've risen above you. I'm out of here. Like that's just kind of the nature of this. And that relationship is a lot more healthy and compassionate. But like, I don't know, I think that's interesting that kind of the end result of this is just kind of, no, we don't need you. We're just going to go. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, great. If there's no other thoughts, I think it's time that we kind of dive into our criteria.
I believe so.
Great. So, our first kind of piece of criteria is historical and technical relevance, which is to say that this is our way of comparing this to Citizen Kane. Rather than just going, I don't know, I think it's better. We're just like, okay, well, let's see, let's talk it through. Historical and technical relevance, we often use that to refer to kind of how did this impact filmmaking. Parker, do you want to kind of explain this? I feel like I've been talking.
You're fine. So basically, just the idea being, okay, Citizen Kane is considered the greatest film of all time. One of the reasons is because it is the granddaddy of narrative filmmaking as we know it, of so many techniques of camera placement and camera movement and editing and directing and all these things. And so we try to compare other movies and be like, okay, where do these movies stack up on a similar spectrum of what was their impact culturally, historically, and technically? Of, okay, did these impact the film industry as a whole, as large, on any of those levels, and is that comparable to what Kane was doing, is kind of the general gist of the idea. How'd I do, Max?
Yeah, that was really good. I mean, did that make sense?
Yes.
I'll let someone else rate Parker's
I'll start. Yeah. Okay. Please. I can get us started off just to give an example. I think that this movie definitely has its influence for sure within like the science fiction space, and especially like AI. Like I hear the two common things I hear about when there's headlines about Chat GPT or anything else in that vein of generative AI is people either bring up her or they bring up this movie. Like I hear that a lot in the headlines and just general discourse online. And so I think it has certainly like left a mark in that regard. I do think it is a little bit more niche than kind of the widespread acclaim of Citizen Kane. You know, a rule of thumb we talk about a lot is like, okay, have our parents or grandparents heard of this movie? Like, do they know, like, would they have any reference point for this? And I imagine but to the film community as a whole, I think it's been very influential. I personally would probably still give the point to Kane, but those would kind of be the things I would point out in favor of Ex Machina.
Yeah, what do you think, Gideon?
Historically, I don't think it's changed filmmaking. I do think it's niche as well. I think it's like, I sort of think of it as a hidden gem because a lot of people I tell about the movie, they don't know it at all. Or even when Civil War was coming out, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the writer director of Ex Machina, and most people have never heard of Ex Machina. I do hear it in conversation about AI and how it was made before its time, like kind of how AI is really, like ChatGPT is gaining popularity and such. Technically, I think it's just really well done and kind of perfected the craft of the screenplay and the reveal of the narrative storytelling. But I don't think it pioneered anything. So I also give the point to Citizen Kane.
Yeah, I think for me, this, just as kind of some other little notes, this did win Best Visual Effects at the 88th Academy Awards. And it was nominated for Best Screenplay, which I would say are the two things. Those two things came up with both of you as kind of like major things that this movie really did super well. They actually didn't use any green screen or any like digital effects. They shot everything live action in person on set, and then everything that they did to replace and kind of create Ava's mechanical elements was done completely in post. But there wasn't even anything. They had like some metal mesh as part of the costume, like around the midsection and around the joints like we see in the movie, just to kind of make it easier for visual effects editors to kind of create what's behind that. But a lot of it was done in camera. The majority of this was done in camera, the main thing being kind of Ava's mechanical elements. And I think it's achieved really well. I think it kind of deserved that Best Visual Effects, I say, not knowing who else was nominated. But yeah, I think, like you said, I think the screenplay is really incredible. And Parker, I really liked what you said earlier about how, I mean, we talk a lot on this podcast about, does the filmmaker love their audience? That's something that we've come to talk about a lot, and I think about all the time. Every time I'm watching a movie, I'm like, does this director like me? And I mean, when watching Civil War, I definitely got the sense that Alex Garland didn't like me. But watching Ex Machina, I got the sense that he was excited to give us something different and new, and in that way, I felt like he really liked the audience. I don't even know what I'm talking about at this point. This does not have anything to do with this criteria point. I would still give it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. I would say, like, going along with liking the audience, I think Alex Garland always respects his audience enough to let you figure it out. Like, he's not going to hold your hand along the whole way.
Totally. I think that's a great point. It's respect. It's not always love. I don't think he's necessarily like, we're going to be close through this process. I think he's like, but I respect you. You deserve something really quality, and I'm not, and you can figure it out. Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting that. Yeah, and then the other thing I was going to say was, this is kind of an early hit for A24 as far as distribution goes. Universal Pictures released this in the UK. Universal and Focus Features, I should say, released this in the UK, and then they refused to release it in the US. They were just like, we're not going to do a US release, though. And so A24 came in, and A24, I believe, kind of got started in 2012, 2013. So this is still pretty new for them. I think this is pretty much regarded as one of the earliest kind of like mainstream A24 films. There's some that kind of fell by the wayside, but this is kind of an early kind of distribution hit for A24, which I think is also kind of note.
Totally.
But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was interesting that A24 was like, okay, fine, we'll do it then. And then they just did. And then it was like really well received. I'll just say really quick, because I missed it at the top of the episode, but filming on this began in July 2013 and ran for a total of 6 weeks at a budget of $15 million. It was released in the UK on January 21st, 2015, and in the US on April 10th, 2015. But it had a premiere in December of 2014, so it's one of those ones where I say, oh, it's 2014, and then I go, but everyone saw it in 2015. And it ended up earning a worldwide gross of $36.8 million, so did super well, all things considered. Better than anyone was expecting, as far as I understood from what Alex Garland said. But, okay, next criteria point. How well is it doing what it's trying to do? We've basically covered this at this point. I think it's doing what it's trying to do really, really well. I think it nails it. I think it absolutely kind of lands it. I don't know. What about you both?
No, I'm just kidding.
This is where you both go, okay, we've been lying. We actually hated it.
I can't keep up the lie anymore. It's a bad movie. You can go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's just, yeah, I think it was from it, like the twists at the end. There's little hints from the beginning, and it just gets to the point, and it's fast. It's got great moments of comedy. I mean, I'm still thinking of that disco scene. It's so good.
It's great. I love it so much.
Good. Yeah, like I consider the movie a comedy, truly. And just, yeah, dialogue is so good. Everyone's believable. Performance is great. I'm kind of, what I did hear was A24. I was surprised it was only distribution, because I feel like so much creativity and agency was given to Alex for writing it. I was kind of surprised that, oh no, this was before A24, which was what they're known for, is like, you know, letting directors just do whatever they want and not like, you know, having big producers telling them what to do. So quite a gem. So glad A24 found it, and for only $15 million, it's really, really good.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it wears its budget well in that
Totally.
like you look at it and you can see, oh, okay, I can see how they would like, this is 15 million because it's
Right,
really,
it's all
set in
one
location.
location.
But it absolutely, like, it rises above that. I'm not sitting here watching this the whole time thinking about, oh, they made this really cheap, huh? Like, I'm like, no, this is just really well put together.
Although I'm sure that 10 million of that went to the glass replacement, because I can't imagine how tedious that was for visual effects, man. Whoa. All of those glass walls and making sure that the reflections of the robot stuff, wild. I think about that a lot when I watch this movie. I'm like,
That's actually
glass.
That's a really good point. I feel like the most expensive stuff in this was absolutely post-production, like editing, and then also just like maybe like the sheer location that they shot on, like when they were outside in like these ice hills, you know, like other than that, if the robot just looked a little more human, I mean, you could have made this real cheap. So that's a good point.
It's a $50 movie after that. I don't know what you're saying.
$50 movie. Yeah, they
That's
actually
a good point about the glass. Like,
Yeah.
I just imagine the PA on set just like, cut. They just like run to the glass and clean it. It's
I can't imagine how many bottles of Windex were used on this set. Must have been
That's
wild.
all I could think about. That's why it was my review, because I was, every time like a hand touched the glass, I was like, oh no. Like, that's
Yeah.
yeah, digital and physical removal of smudges and reflections, I'm sure, was a real hassle.
Totally.
And then we all, you know, emotionally connect with this. That's kind of our last point here, is do you emotionally connect with it? Which is basically, do you like it? And sounds like we're all...
And I very much do. I think, like, the one thing I'll say here, because I sense the question of why isn't this 5 stars for me instead of 4.5? And it is entirely... It is a personal preference thing where my half star comes from of... And I'm terrified of sounding like the made-up guy you were talking about, 15 minutes ago of like, well, if you put it in the movie, you're endorsing it. But like the one thing that I rub up against ever so slightly with this movie is I'm not crazy about trauma porn, violence against women. And I think that section where like that sequence where he sees all the security footage feels a little more exploitative than I think it needs to be. Like, I think it's a little more coming back to that question of like respecting the audience. Like, I would like to have just a little bit more respect for those characters and that subject matter a little bit. And like, you need to see it to like really sell the horror of what he's seeing and to really make us turn against Nathan fully. But just like, it's such a personal present thing. So I'm like, could have done a little bit less of that, I think. But that's just my personal like half-star mark against the movie that otherwise is pretty damn near flawless.
Sure. I feel like that's, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have put it so specifically, so I appreciate you kind of saying that. But I feel like just personally, it's not quite 5 stars. I usually say 5 stars for a movie that I think is absolutely flawless, and also I just fully love it. And I think this movie is, like you said, Parker, damn near flawless. But I just am, it's not my favorite. It's not my cup of tea all the time, you know. But I do think it's perfect. So 4.5 is like still like a perfect score in my opinion.
Sure.
5 stars are for those that sit in my heart and make me talk about them too much to everyone else. I say at the end of what, like an hour episode? Great. Cool. And then, yeah, Yadin, any final thoughts on you like this movie? I mean, you brought it, so I assume.
No, I actually hate No, as you know, I love it. I think just the whole experience watching it for the first time was just entertaining from beginning to end. Love everything about it. I will agree with the violence against women. I think it's pretty obvious that Nathan is a misogynist and views even his own, like, this is like a huge monumental moment in his career, and he's still just kind of minimizing it by making them women and kind of treating them that way and having them naked just like around.
Yeah.
And then keeping the bodies really as like trophies. So gross. But yeah, I understand that point of view. But yeah, I love this movie. I think it's very interesting. It's themes of the women breaking through and gaining their own agency and taking this misogynist into their own hands by stabbing him with little force and leaving one of them for dead. So
yeah,
10 out of 10.
I think that's a great way of summing that up. Absolutely. And even like kind of drawing on support from women before them who didn't make it out, who aren't alive, but kind of literally kind of carrying them. You know, Ava literally carries parts of them with her. Kind of like, I don't know. I think that's a really beautiful part of that too. It's kind of carrying that on as well. Of like, I'm sorry that you couldn't get out. Okay, so that's our criteria. By points, we would say that Ex Machina is better, but kind of we like to take a step back because I think one time we got really close to saying, I don't know, it may have been Forrest Gump or something where I was like, I almost convinced myself
don't drag me into this. You got dangerously close to saying Forrest. No,
I don't think it was Forrest Gump. I bring it up and then I immediately am like, Parker, why would you
backtrack.
But just kind of taking a step back, where do we land finally? Do we feel that this is better? And it's a completely subjective thing, so whatever you want to say.
I would say yes on the merits that I think this is taking all of the lessons that Citizen Kane teaches and using them to full effect. Like, it is using cinematography and camera placement and direction and acting and editing to very full extent. Like, none of those pieces of the stew that makes up filmmaking, none of those ingredients aren't being used very expertly in this movie. So I think it's taking what was set down before by Citizen Kane and others and, you know, continuing on with that. So I would say that it is, personally.
I think it's I agree with Parker. Like, it's a definitely perfected. all the technical aspects that I don't think could have existed without Citizen Kane. And it's hard to compare it because Citizen Kane is a 1941 movie. This is a 2015, so it's like they can't even really be compared on that level. But I gotta say Citizen Kane is the winner for me, even though I love Ex Machina, just because I think with its pioneering, and I'm always down to rewatch Citizen Kane. I think it's a fun time, and just to catch the little bits. And yeah, I don't know, it's hard. It's like because Ex Machina is one of my favorite movies, and I wouldn't say Citizen Kane is a favorite movie. But yeah, Citizen Kane is better to me.
Great. Yeah. Wherever you land. Love it. Yeah, for me, it's tricky. I like what you're saying, Parker, in that, in the book I'm reading, because I'm reading a book about Citizen Kane. I don't know. But
I hate you so much.
I know. In that they talk about how, like, there were so many things that, like, Mankiewicz wrote in the screenplay that were, like, these long pages of dialogue that Orson Welles basically cut, like, last draft, right before shooting. He was just like, we don't need this. We can do this in a look. And I think that that's one of the key things that Citizen Kane kind of brought to modern filmmaking is, like, just kind of like, okay, it's a visual medium. Like, we don't need, like, long, like, scrolling text. We don't need this. We don't need all these kind of, like, poetic theatrical lines, which believe me, I love. In the shorts that Parker and I have worked on together, my words have been the ones that have been cut because we don't need them. It's not. Don't laugh like you're, like, embarrassed, Parker. It's true. No. It's a good thing.
I laugh that you just keep bringing it up. Like, it's one of those things that, like, man, he really. A comment made to Professor to me. You weren't even there. I just told you about it later. You're like, man, I'm still just. They wanted to cut my stuff.
Was my tone as if I am steaming about it?
But I know.
Angry?
But I can tell. I can read. Right. I read right through you.
All right. Anyway, all this to say that I think Ex Machina is a great example of, like, just kind of cutting everything else away, especially just from its first shot. It is like, here is the bare minimum of what you need to know before we get started, and we're going to get right in. We're going to get in and out clean, like that knife into Nathan's back, and it's going to be efficient. And I think that it's an efficient film, not even detrimentally. It just knows what it's doing and works really well. That being said, I think this is a really hard one. This is a hard one. I think I'm going to say that Citizen Kane is still a little better.
Okay.
I think.
All right. 2-1.
With an asterisk, which is Ex Machina rocks. This thing rules, and it's great, and it's a damn near flawless film, if not flawless. But I think I'm going to give it to Citizen Kane.
Okay, so definitively we have decided as the three most important voices in the world of historical and cinematic culture that Ex Machina is not better than Citizen Kane.
Okay, great. Wait, that was... Wow, I don't know if I like that, like, being our sign-off is, well, and as the most important people in history.
Look, I'm just trying to change it up. I'm just trying to keep it interesting.
I know. We've got to be better about not sounding so apologetic for having a podcast.
I like that sign-off. I think that's the new one for episodes I'm not in. 2 out of the 3 most important voices in the world are here. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So right, we have the 2 most authorities and then some schmuck in a green shirt over here who doesn't know what he's talking about. So
no, Parker. I think she's saying that when she's not here, we only have 2 of the 3.
I have only put this closer when she's here. So, I'm pretty sure it's you 2. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like we'd love to have you back so we can have the 4 most knowledgeable and important people in film history talk about another movie sometime.
Would love that very much.
Which is our way of saying thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure and so fun to talk about movies and watch you guys fight a little bit. That's always entertaining.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, it's always a good time, I think.
And luckily, you can tune in next time to hear Parker and I fight about 1998's Brazilian road drama Central Station, which Parker hasn't seen.
I have not seen. And just for that comment, I'm going to come in completely neutral. I will follow anything you say. There's not going to be a hint of conflict next time.
Well, that doesn't sound fun for anyone, but
No.
as if we have conflict. Our conflict is that Parker doesn't like me. Anyway, okay, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for being here again. We really appreciate it, Yein. You were a wonderful guest. Thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you, Yein. We really have
course.
enjoyed having you.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you all for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Catch you next time.
Bye.